The smell of motor oil and old coffee is what I remember most about my father's house. Not grief, not silence. Just that smell, rising up from the carpet and the walls like it had been living there longer than either of us. He died on a Tuesday in March. A coworker called me because he hadn't shown up to his shift at the hardware store, which was the only reason anyone noticed. The county coroner listed it as cardiac arrest. He was 61 years old. He had eaten oatmeal that morning. The bowl was still in the sink when I got there. My father was a retired Army Ranger. 3 tours, he never talked about any of it. Growing up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, I knew he'd served the way a fact you memorized for a test. It was there, but it didn't feel connected to anything real. He didn't wear it. No patches on a jacket, no framed photos above the fireplace, no stories at dinner. When I was 12, I found a deployment photo tucked inside a Bible he never opened. He was young in it, standing in a line of men I didn't recognize, squinting into a sun somewhere far from here. When I showed it to him, he just said, "That was a long time ago," and went back to fixing the screen door. He lived in the same house for 30 years. Drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. He planted tomatoes every spring and gave most of them away to neighbors. He drank his coffee black and went to bed early and paid his bills in paper checks that he mailed to the post office himself. There was nothing about him that suggested anything other than what he appeared to be. My brother Kevin, he called me the same night the coroner did. "So it's just the house then," he said, "and whatever's in it." I didn't answer right away. "I'm just saying we should figure out the logistics," he continued. "I can drive down next weekend." It hadn't been 6 hours. Kevin lived in Charlotte. He had a good job, a nice apartment, a car he leased and traded in every 2 years. He was also $40,000 in debt from a restaurant he'd opened and closed in the span of 18 months. I knew this because my father had told me, quietly, the previous Christmas. Not as gossip, but as worry. "He doesn't know how to let things settle," my father said. "He always needs the next thing." I told Kevin I'd call him back. Then I sat in my father's kitchen and looked at his coffee mug on the drying rack and didn't move for a long time. The funeral was at the National Cemetery in Grafton. It was small. My father had no siblings. His parents were long gone. A few men from his old unit had stayed in touch over the years, but I didn't know their names or how to reach them. It was me, Kevin, my father's neighbor Gerald, and a woman from the Veterans Service Organization who read a passage she read at all of them. The rifle volley echoed off the hills. A young soldier folded the flag in tight, precise triangles and handed it to me without making eye contact. Kevin stood beside me with his hands in his coat pockets. He didn't cry. I didn't either. I just kept thinking about that bowl in the sink. The oatmeal he'd eaten before his heart stopped. The ordinary Tuesday of it all. I was walking back to the car when a man fell into step beside me. He was tall, older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of posture that doesn't relax even in civilian clothes. He didn't look like he'd driven up for a service. He looked like he'd been standing somewhere in the tree line the whole time, watching. "You're his daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. I said yes. "I served with your father." He paused. "A long time ago." I noticed the retired rank on his lapel pin then. Colonel. Army. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and handed me a business card. Plain white. Just a name, a phone number, and below it an address, not a street address, a P.O. box in Leesburg, Virginia. "Call that number," he said. "Tell them your father's name. Tell them you're his daughter." He looked at me steadily. "They'll know what to do." Before I could ask anything, who they were, what they'd know, what any of this had to do with a man who gave away tomatoes and drove a 200,000-mile truck. He nodded once and walked to a car parked alone on the far side of the lot. I watched him go. Kevin had seen none of it. He was already on his phone. That night I went back to my father's house alone. Kevin had offered to stay, but I told him there was nothing to go through yet, which was partly true and partly something else. I needed to be in that house without him taking inventory of it. I didn't know what I was looking for. I went through the kitchen drawers first, out of habit. Paper clips, rubber bands, takeout menus for places that had probably closed. His junk drawer had a flashlight with dead batteries and a grocery list in his handwriting from what looked like 2 years ago. Bread, coffee filters, motor oil. I stood there holding it for longer than made sense. In his bedroom closet, behind a winter coat he'd had since before I was born. I found a fireproof lockbox. Standard hardware store model, the kind people keep documents in. I didn't have the key, but I shook it and could tell there was something inside. Paper, not heavy, not coins. I put it on the kitchen table and left it there. Kevin texted that night. Did he have a will on file anywhere? I told him yes, with an attorney in town. Which was true. The house came to both of us equally. Everything else, which we both assumed was nothing much, was in the will too. I called the number on the card the next morning. A man answered. Calm voice, no particular regional accent. I gave him my father's name and said I was his daughter. There was a pause, not confused, more like confirming something. Yes, he said. We've been expecting someone to call. The phrasing was careful, not you, someone. Like they hadn't been sure who it would be. He told me his name was Winston. He said he worked with a Veterans Foundation based in Leesburg. He said my father had been involved with the foundation for many years and that there were some things they needed to walk me through in person. How soon can you come? He asked. I told him I could drive up that weekend. That would be fine, he said. Bring identification. And if you have a copy of the death certificate, that would help. He didn't say money. He didn't say estate. He was very careful about what he didn't say. After I hung up, I went back to the lockbox. I found a spare key on a hook inside the kitchen cabinet, labeled in my father's handwriting, just 2 letters, LB, lockbox. Inside were 4 things: a copy of the foundation's legal charter, dated 2004, a letter from an attorney in Leesburg acknowledging my father as a founding member, a handwritten note in an envelope with my name on the outside, and a small laminated card with a phone number and the words "in case of my death, contact Winston" first written on it. He'd planned for this. Whatever this was, he planned for it. Kevin called that afternoon. I talked to the attorney, he said. The house appraised at about $220. That's not nothing. Split down the middle, that's $110 each. I know how to divide 2 numbers. He laughed, a little embarrassed. I'm just saying it's not nothing. He had some other things to sort out, I said. I'll tell you when I know more. Other things like what? I don't know yet. There was a pause. You're doing that thing where you get quiet and handle everything yourself. Maybe, but I'd learned it from somewhere. I didn't tell him about the card. I didn't tell him about Leesburg. The drive up was 3 hours. The foundation's office was in a converted colonial on a residential street. Nothing that looked like an organization from the outside. A small sign by the door, understated dark lettering on cream. I almost drove past it. Winston met me in a front room with 2 armchairs and a coffee table. He was probably 60, black, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular patience of a man who'd had difficult conversations before and didn't feel the need to rush through them. I'm sorry for your loss, he said. Your father was a man of unusual consistency. I asked what the foundation did. He folded his hands. We provide support to post-9/11 veterans and their families, medical costs not covered by the VA, housing stabilization, educational support for dependents. Your father was one of our founding members. I said I didn't understand. My father had worked at a hardware store. He did, Winston said. For the last 15 years, he also contributed consistently to a restricted fund here. He served on the board informally. He helped us identify men and women who needed help and didn't know how to ask for it. He opened a folder and turned it toward me. Inside were financial statements. My father's name was on them. The numbers were not what I expected from a man with a 200,000-mile truck. The restricted fund had a current balance of a little over $9 million. I stared at it. He contributed from a pension and from investments, Winston said. He lived below his means for a long time. The growth has been consistent. $9 million, I said. Yes, he clipped coupons. I know. I sat back in the chair. The room felt the same size it had a minute ago, which seemed wrong. He never said anything, I told him. Winston nodded slowly. He was specific about that. He said, and I'm quoting from his own written instructions here, I don't want it to change how anyone looks at me. Not while I'm alive. He slid another envelope across the table. My name on the front, in my father's block handwriting. He left this to be given to his successor, Winston said. That's you, if you choose to accept it. What does accepting it mean? It means you assume his seat on the board. You become a co-steward of the fund alongside our existing directors. Distributings continue as designed. Nothing changes unless you change it. He paused. You can also decline. The fund continues without a family representative. That's also within your rights. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. Not yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Kevin, I let it ring. Winston gave me a moment. There's no urgency today, he said. Take what you need. I drove to a rest stop on Route 7 before I opened the letter. I needed to be somewhere without walls. The paper was thick, lined notebook paper, the kind he'd always bought in bulk at the start of every school year. His handwriting was the same as it had always been, capitals slightly too large, the letters pressed down hard enough to almost tear. If you're reading this, then I didn't get to say it out loud. I'm sorry for that. My throat closed. He wrote that after his last tour, he came home and spent a long time trying to figure out what he was supposed to do with the fact that he'd made it back, and some of the men beside him hadn't. Not guilt, exactly. He was clear about that. More like a debt he didn't know how to calculate. He said he'd spent years looking for the right denomination. You don't repay that kind of thing with a check. But you can keep the math from getting worse for the people left behind. He'd started contributing quietly, introducing men he knew to Winston, showing up at board meetings in the same work clothes he wore to the hardware store. He never told me because he'd watched money change people. Cousins who stopped speaking after their grandmother's estate. A good friend whose kids had fought for years over a fishing cabin. He didn't want me to look at him differently. He didn't want Kevin to start calculating. Kevin loves you, he wrote. He just hasn't learned to be still yet. I hope he gets there. I think he will. Near the end, one line that I read 3 times, the fund isn't a gift. It's a practice. It keeps going because someone keeps showing up. I think that person is you. I folded the letter and held it in both hands for a while. Then I called Kevin back. Sorry, I said. I was in a meeting. A meeting, he repeated. On a Saturday. There's something Dad left, I told him. It's not what either of us expected. I need a little time to understand it before I explain it. Silence. Then, how much time? A week? Maybe 2. That's not. He stopped. Is it something I should know about right now? It's a foundation, I said. Dad was involved in a veterans foundation. There's money in it. Another silence, longer this time. Like, for us? Not exactly, I said. That's what I need to explain. He exhaled. I'll drive down. He drove down the next morning and let himself in before I was awake. He was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, standing at the counter with his arms crossed the way he always stood when he was preparing himself for something. Tell me, he said. I laid it out as plainly as I could. The foundation, the board seat, what the fund was used for, the balance. When I said $9 million, something shifted in his face. It wasn't greed exactly. It was more like the thing behind greed, the need to believe that if there's money somewhere, it owes you something. He sat on $9 million, Kevin said. He built it. For veterans. He had a son, Kevin said. He had a daughter. He had family. He helped you with the restaurant. Kevin's jaw tightened. That was a loan. He never expected it back. That's not the same thing. He pushed off the counter. He had a $9 million fund, and he let me take out personal loans to stay afloat. He thought you needed to figure some things out yourself, I said. That's a nice way to say he wrote me off. That's not what he said. Kevin looked at me. What did he say? I hesitated. He said you hadn't learned to be still yet, and that he thought you would. Kevin turned away. He stood at the window that faced the backyard where the tomato cages were still up from last season, rusted wire and frozen ground. What happens now? He asked. I told him about the board seat, about the option to accept or decline, about the distributions that continued either way, and if you accepted, he said, you control it. I'd be one of several directors. I don't control it. I participate in it. And I don't. You're not on the board. No. He turned back to face me. I want a lawyer. I'd expected that. Okay, I said. I'm serious. I know you are. Kevin hired an estate attorney in Charlotte named Patricia. She was thorough. I'll give her that. She filed a formal request for full disclosure of the foundation's assets and governance documents. citing that my father's contributions might constitute undisclosed assets within his estate and that my brother, as an heir, had standing to contest. My attorney, a woman named June who practiced in Morgantown and had the quiet energy of someone who'd navigated 100 of these, reviewed everything and called me on a Tuesday morning. "The foundation is legally airtight," she said. "The contributions were made over 20 years to a registered 501c3. They are not part of his personal estate. Kevin's claim has no basis in probate law." "Will he drop it?" "Probably not right away," she said. "People rarely do when there's a number this size attached. But it won't hold." It didn't hold. The hearing was scheduled in Circuit Court in Harrison County. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the quiet procedural weight of paperwork moving through a system designed for exactly this kind of thing. Kevin sat at the opposite table. He wouldn't look at me for the first 10 minutes. The judge reviewed the foundation charter, the 20 years of documented contributions, and June's brief in under an hour. "The petitioner has not established that the decedent's contributions to this 501c3 constitute estate assets subject to division," she said. "The foundation is a separate legal entity. The petition is dismissed." Outside the courthouse, Kevin sat on the steps for a long time before he said anything. "You could have just split it," he said. "It's not mine to split." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." He looked down at his shoes. The day was cold and flat, gray sky, bare trees. "He trusted you more," Kevin said, not angrily, just as a fact he was sitting with. "He trusted me with this," I said. "That's different than more." Kevin shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to do with that." I sat down next to him on the steps. Two siblings on a courthouse staircase with their father 3 weeks in the ground, trying to figure out who he'd been. "He left a provision," I said, "in the foundation structure. There's a family support clause. I can allocate funds for direct family stabilization, debt counseling, financial planning, conditional distributions tied to documented progress." Kevin looked at me. "It has conditions," I said. "It's not a lump sum, it's structured." "He built a box for me," Kevin said. "He built a box for both of us," I said. "I have conditions too. I show up to board meetings. I review every distribution. I answer for the decisions I make." He was quiet for a moment. "What are the conditions?" "Financial counseling. Monthly. A fee-only advisor paid by the foundation. Structured debt repayment plan. Distributings tied to milestones, not calendar months." Kevin stared out at the parking lot. "You want to put me on a payment plan?" "I want to stop watching you drown in cycles," I said. "Dad wanted that too. That's why the clause is there." He really thought this through, down to the detail. Kevin exhaled slowly, something releasing in his shoulders that I hadn't seen since we were kids. "The restaurant was a mistake," he said. "I knew it 6 months in. I know I didn't want to admit it. I know that too." We sat there for another few minutes. A couple came out of the courthouse behind us carrying folders, walking fast, not talking. Somewhere in the parking lot, a car alarm went off and stopped. "What if I'm bad at the counseling?" Kevin asked. "Then you do it again," I said. He almost smiled. Almost. I drove back to Clarksburg that afternoon. I stopped at my father's house, even though I didn't have a reason. I just needed to stand in it again. The oatmeal bowl had been washed and put away weeks ago. His boots were still by the door, exactly where he'd left them. I sat at the kitchen table where he used to do the crossword puzzles and stared at the wall where there were no medals and no certificates, just a calendar from the hardware store and the pencil holder shaped like a coffee mug that Kevin had given him in 3rd grade. A man who had built something $9 million deep had this on his wall. I joined the board formally the following month. Winston walked me through the governance documents, the current beneficiaries, the rolling applications. A father in Beckley who needed a wheelchair ramp, a widow in Fairmont whose husband had died before his disability rating came through and who was about to lose her house, 3 kids in different corners of West Virginia whose fathers had come back from deployment changed in ways no one had prepared for and who were trying to put themselves through college anyway. My father's name appeared in the fund's founding documents but nowhere in its promotional materials. He had specifically requested that. Winston told me he'd been firm about it. No naming rights, no plaques, no legacy wall. He said, "Winston told me, I don't need anyone to remember that I helped. I just need the help to get there." Kevin started his counseling in April. He didn't tell me until his second session. He texted one morning, just started the thing. It's fine. I didn't respond with anything more than a thumbs up because I thought he needed it to be small for a while. By August, he paid off 2 credit cards, sold a motorcycle he'd had in storage for 3 years, and used it to reduce the restaurant debt. He called me one Sunday evening, not about money, just to talk about nothing. The way we used to before our mother died and everything in the family got a little quieter and a little more careful. "You went to Leesburg alone," he said during that call. "You didn't tell me. I needed to understand it first. Were you protecting him?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "A little. I think I was." "He didn't need protecting," Kevin said. "He was fine." "I know." I paused. "I think I was protecting the version of him I thought I knew, until I had something better to replace it with." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "The counselor asked me last week what I was most proud of." I didn't have an answer. "You will," I said. "Maybe." The following spring, Kevin drove down on a Saturday and we went to the cemetery together. It wasn't planned. He called Friday night and said he wanted to come, and I said okay. We stopped at a gas station and he bought bad coffee, and I didn't say anything about it. We stood at my father's stone for a while. His name, his rank, his years. Nothing extra. He wouldn't have wanted anything extra. "He was more than I thought," Kevin said. "Yeah, I don't mean the money." "I know." Kevin looked at the stone. "I called him selfish once," he said. "After the restaurant, I said he could have helped more and chose not to. I didn't respond to that. I was wrong," he said. "Not about the help. He could have given me more directly and chose not to. But I was wrong about why." He paused. "It wasn't cruelty. It was," he searched for the word. "Discipline," I said. "Yeah." Kevin nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's it." The wind moved the flags on the surrounding stones the same way wind does, without caring about the weight of the moment. I thought about the counselor who'd asked Kevin what he was proud of. I thought about the woman in Fairmont who'd kept her house because of a quiet disbursement from a fund my father spent 20 years building. I thought about how he'd gone to the hardware store and planted his tomatoes and paid his bills by mail, and never once suggested he was doing anything other than exactly what you see. "Steady wins," I said. Kevin looked at me. "What?" "Something I read once." I didn't explain it further. Just something that stuck. On the drive home, I thought about what Winston had said at our first meeting, that the foundation was a practice, not a monument. That it kept going because people kept showing up. My father had showed up for 20 years without recognition, without an audience, without a single person in his family knowing the math behind his silence. Now it was mine to maintain. I still pass his house sometimes. I haven't sold it yet. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the smell of motor oil and old coffee hasn't faded and I'm not ready for it to. The tomato cages are still in the backyard. I haven't planted anything. But it's only March. I keep thinking about the lockbox, not the $9 million, not the board seat or the legal filings or the drive up Route 7 in early spring, just the lockbox, sitting on my father's kitchen table the night after his funeral. Combination key labeled LB in his handwriting. Everything inside exactly where he'd left it. He'd prepared for that moment. He'd thought about me opening it before I even knew it existed. That's the part that stays with me. Not the scale of what he built, but the care of it. The decades of small, consistent choices that added up to something none of us could see from the outside. My father wasn't a complicated man in the way people sometimes mean that, as an excuse, a mystery, a wound. He was complicated the way integrity is complicated. It takes longer, it's quieter. It doesn't announce itself at dinner, and it doesn't ask to be remembered. He got up every morning and made the same choices. Give more than you take, don't make noise about it, let the work speak when the time comes. The time came 3 weeks after his heart stopped in his kitchen on a Tuesday in March. Kevin almost missed it. He was so focused on what the estate owed him that he couldn't see what our father had actually left. And I understand it now in a way I couldn't have without sitting across from Winston in that office, or reading my father's letter in a parking lot off Route 7, or watching Kevin's face in the courthouse when the number finally landed. Kevin wasn't wrong that he was struggling. He was wrong about what would fix it. A lump sum doesn't teach you discipline, it just resets the clock. My father knew that. That's why the clause existed. What I've learned from all of it, and I'm still learning it slowly, is that character isn't something you have in a crisis. It's something you practice before the crisis arrives. My father practiced it for 30 years in a 3-bedroom house in Clarksburg. He drove a rusted truck and clipped coupons and gave away tomatoes and quietly made sure that widows in Fairmont kept their houses and kids in Beckley got to college. No one knew. That was the point. And when it was tested, when Kevin filed and the lawyers filed and the courtroom lights buzzed overhead, none of it bent. Because you can't challenge something built that honestly. The structure held because the man was solid. That's not luck. That's the result of choosing over and over to do the harder right thing instead of the easier, comfortable one. I think about what Kevin said at the cemetery that spring. I thought he was small. I've thought it too, in different ways, at different times. We look at a quiet life and we read it as a small one. We mistake stillness for absence. My father wasn't absent. He was the steadiest person in any room he ever walked into. We just weren't paying attention. The tomato cages are still in the backyard. I haven't planted anything yet, but I keep the lockbox key on my keychain now, right next to my house key. So I remember, every single day, what it looks like when someone actually does the work.